If you were diagnosed with autism as an adult, how would you respond? I would think it would include relief that there's a name for lifelong challenges that you've faced. And this happened to Angela Lauria, Dr. Angela Lauria, and she drew on her own experience as well as her interest to help others write, publish, and promote their own stories. And in this podcast, we talk about characteristics and dispel some of the misconceptions about autism. So stay tuned for a fascinating and informative interview. This podcast is brought to you by DJ Works Media with resources and ideas for you at mid-career or halftime of life. Check out our online courses where we want you to not only start, but finish. Books available in all versions and songs available for immediate download with sheet music and instrumental accompaniment tracks. Our musicals are family-friendly with great music that's memorable and inspiring. Sign up at goalsforyourlife.com/newsletter for weekly updates. Now to our episode. Well, I'm so excited to introduce Dr. Hopefully I got your full name right now, Angela Lauria. And you have an amazing story. And I like my guests to share their story instead of me just telling all about it or introducing all about it. So what fascinated me about you, Dr. Angela, or Angela, I should say.
You can call me.
Thank you. You never know what people prefer. Is that you were diagnosed as an adult. And I know so little about this. And I know I am going to learn a lot. And I know my audience is too. So why don't you tell us a little about your story, your background, first of all, because you're a doctor, and what kind of doctor are you, and how did you figure this out, and what's your journey?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say, I am 51. It seems like a good way to start this podcast. Yes. And I grew up at a time, first of all, autism in general was not even discovered until 1940.
Wow.
And then all of that early testing and research was all done on predominantly white boys. Mm-hmm. That's just how it worked out. And there's a bunch of reasons why the history worked out that way. So when I was in school, there was no way I would have been diagnosed. There were women being diagnosed this time, but it was a very, very small percentage. And it was seen as a condition that affected boys. Mm-hmm. Of course, it was seen that way because they were the only ones that they were doing research on. Right. So it is not surprising that most of us don't get diagnosed at all, but it is not surprising my diagnosis was late because of my age. Right. It would be very rare. But I will tell you a fun story of growing up and how I came to do what I do. There was a family folklore that was always told. I don't remember not knowing this story, that my dad, when he was 13, he fell in love with hot rods. And he got a shoe shine box. It was my grandfather's shoe shine box. And he took it from my grandfather. And he would go to the steps of St. Mary's Church in New Haven, Connecticut. And he would charge a quarter to shine people's shoes when they would go in and out of church. And he saved up his quarters. And when he was 16, he bought a car. He restored it. Everyone would always tell me, we don't know how he graduated from high school. Everyone thought he was going to drop out. He's skin of his teeth, just barely graduated. But when he graduated, he started a business. Wow. And immediately started making money and having success. Today, my dad is in the Hot Rod Hall of Fame. Wow. He's worked on many famous cars you've seen, the Hot Rod in the Hot for Teacher Van Halen video. He's worked on the Bonneville Salt Flats. He worked on Kit Car, on Knight Rider. And when I grew up, we had that plaque in our kitchen. You probably had it too. Children learn what they live.
Oh, right? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So what I grew up thinking was, from 13 or so, you find what you love in the world. And then you go do that thing and you make lots of money because you did what you love. If you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And so that's what I did. When I was 13, I wrote my first book.
Wow.
And yes, it was a novel that started a question to ponder once more and forever, which I don't know what I was pondering.
So deep for 13. Oh my God.
Judy Blume. I read forever. And then I was like, I will do this. And then very quickly began making money writing. My job in high school and in college was writing other people's term papers for $10 a page.
Oh, hey, that's good money.
Yeah. And then I graduated, and my senior year, I majored in journalism. My senior year, I got a job working for a very famous New York Times bestselling author, and started a very successful career in publishing, including getting a PhD in communications in Switzerland. There's a film director from Baltimore named John Waters. Some people know him. Good Morning, Baltimore. The show is his.
Right.
He was on my dissertation committee.
Wow.
So that was kind of fun, and really had this incredibly successful career as a ghostwriter, which I knew I would because I found what I loved when I was 13, and then you make lots of money doing it.
Right.
However, relationships were an utter disaster for me. Not just romantic relationships, human relationships. And I was constantly in a state of frustration and drama and discord, and I could never really understand why. And I had a wrongful termination lawsuit that I was considering. And I went to this labor lawyer, and I thought it was gender discrimination.
Oh. Okay.
And the lawyer said to me, I think this is an ADA case, Americans with Disabilities Act.
Wow.
Like looking around for the wheelchair. Yeah. I'm like, I'm not blind. Like, what? This is an ADA case. And he's like, have you ever considered that you might have Asperger's? I was like, no. And I don't even know what it is, but like, isn't that the boys with the trains hitting their head against the wall thing? Like, just no knowledge, complete ignorance. So he's like, yeah, go to my friend Barry. He does autism diagnosis, or at the time it was Asperger's, but he does Asperger's diagnosis. Go to Barry. Once you get that letter, we'll file the lawsuit. So I went to Barry, who was a doctor and a psychiatrist, and I think I was in there for 15 minutes, maybe. And he's like, yep, Asperger's, here's your letter. Wow. And I immediately thought, this is a scam. I'm like, this guy, I remember going to a nutritionist who like told me I was vitamin D deficient. And then I found out everyone who went to this nutritionist
was vitamin D.
I'm like, this is some vitamin D scam. Like, guy just tells everybody you have Asperger's. He sends you Barry. You pay Barry the $1,500. He sends $500 back to his. I'm like, I don't really believe this. Yeah. But and I never went back to the lawyer. Never filed that lawsuit. Did not think I qualified for the ADA. Like, but I started. So that is how I got my autism diagnosis. And I really kind of paid it no mind, but it was like a little bug that was just in my head chirping away. So I like bought a book, or I would like watch documentaries, and I was like, God, this would explain a lot. And the more, so I still don't know whether Barry and the lawyer were scams. Like, they may very well have been. I don't know. Right. What I do know is and I found this website. It was called Wrong Planet. And one of the things that many people with autism say is, I feel like I was born on the wrong planet. And I had said that my whole life. Wow. I had always said that. So I found this website, Wrong Planet, and they would have like meetups. And I would be like, all of these people have my story. And so over time, for a lot of people, what happens, especially post TikTok, post COVID, is they learn a little about autism and then they identify themselves.
Oh,
like,
yes.
oh, I might be autistic.
Yeah.
And then they go get a diagnosis.
Right.
For me, in this weird turn of events, I got a diagnosis and that led me to identify, oh, I am autistic. There was a blogger. This was I was diagnosed at 39. So it was like 12, I think.
Okay.
And there's a blogger, her name was Penelope Trunk. Okay. I don't even know if she's still out there, but I read everything she wrote and I was like, is she reading my diary? Every fight I've ever had. So one of the things autistic people struggle with is literal interpretation. And so someone will ask, like, how are you? And we think they mean, how are you? So we answer with a very extrapolated answer. And then that person thinks, wow, she's weird. Yeah. And so they avoid you. And then you're like, why are you avoiding me? And then like, they don't tell you. They're like, oh, no, I'm not avoiding you. I'm just busy. And so then you as the autistic person are like, they're just busy. They're really busy. So then you keep trying to talk to them, but they're thinking, you're really weird. Why are you talking to me? I've already told you I don't like you. They don't like you. They told you they were busy. So you thought they were busy. So there's a lot of miscommunication that was at the heart of my relationship struggles and coming to understand my autism diagnosis, which was the journey of my 40s of really understanding that. I really changed everything in my life and my relationships from a much deeper understanding of who I was and how my operating system works. So I still love books. I still am a ghostwriter. I help people write books. I help people publish books. But now I don't piss my clients off as much. So
well, it helped you understand yourself so much more. So you knew maybe what roadblocks were going to get in the way of a good communication. That can affect everything in your life. How interesting. I mean,
and of course I have a PhD in communication, right?
Yes. I just think it's hilarious that nobody even diagnosed this until, was it Barry? It came through and, that quick diagnosis.
So one of the other things that's very common with autistic people is they don't do well in a classroom setting. And so there are often, you may have heard the term twice exceptional.
Okay.
So the two exceptions are the gifted and talented piece, right? So you like have a data hunger and you're usually really fast, but then also you have these social deficits. So you're exceptional on the other end when it comes to social interaction. So growing up, I was always either in the principal's office or because I was like difficult. So here's one of the ways I was difficult in class. Teachers would say class participation helps. Like that's 10% of your grade or something. So I'd sit in the front and every time the teacher said a sentence, I would say a sentence back.
Oh gosh.
Because class participation counted. And then when I would get marked down for class participation, so I would participate more. I would go to the library. I would get books. I'd find out the syllabus in advance. I would show in with like alternative data that I would want to share. I would prepare charts and dioramas.
Oh my gosh. So, you were every teacher's nightmare. Oh no.
Why it wasn't working. So there were teachers who got me. Yes. And Angela's amazing. She's so smart. We're going to put her in an advanced book or class. We're going to give her a different curriculum just for her. And we're going to have her sit in the hallway. So I spent most of school in a desk in the hallway doing my own curriculum. Now, today, that would be spotted. Girls, boys, non-binary kids, you would be spotted as autistic or neurodivergent right away. But 1986, the teachers were just doing their best. I was driving them nuts. And some of them would send me to the principal's office. And some of them would be like, you're the best student I've ever had. Here, read these books in the hallway. Nobody had the solution or the information now. So we're seeing more and more people get diagnosed late, especially women and people of color who were missed, because same reason we get missed for heart disease. It shows up different in women, and they did all the studies on the dudes.
That is so interesting. And especially that you were able then to go and do some research and say, I think there might be, give me more information about this. And then being able to say, wow, that is me. I love that. The sort of, how are you? And, that sort of, how you would respond to some of those questions. So some of those real life things, and on another, the wrong planet. That was great. We'll have to see if that website is still out there somewhere.
It is wrongplanet.net. It's still up there.
Yeah. Well,
there's many more resources now but at the time that was it. So.
Wow. Interesting. Very, very interesting. I'm sure some of the listeners are going, oh, I got to look that one up. Yeah. So that's good. So another question for you. So how have you been able to kind of leverage your autistic, because you have this diagnosis now, and to leverage your strengths, because apparently your mind goes, I think the autism diagnosis, there are some of the smartest people and some of the most creative people that are autistic. And we'll talk about that too. But how did that affect you then when you have a diagnosis? Did it free you up?
In a lot of ways. So first of all, I want to say there's a theory that I really like that is called neurodiversity, the theory of neurodiversity. So if you think about the theory of biodiversity, I like to think about it just in terms of tulips. If you looked at a field of tulips, just like, we talk about no two snowflakes are the same. No two tulips are the same. They're short, they're tall, they're chubby, they're skinny. They're all different. Right. And so while I am going to talk about things I love about autism, I also love all brains. So this isn't to say autistic people are better or it's a superpower. It's not better. It's not a superpower. I like tall, skinny tulips. I like short, fat tulips. I like red tulips. I like yellow tulips. I believe in the beauty of neurodiversity. I also don't think autistic brains are less than, just like I don't think short tulips are less than, right? No. So, there's a couple things you should know about autistic brains. They are hyper-connected brains. And it's really, it's a little bit of science, but it's really boring once you get it. So autism is biological. It is passed down from parent to child. That is how you get autism. And the specific thing that is passed is a resistance to a type of protein in the brain called mTOR protein, MTOR. mTOR protein, what it causes when you have it in your brain is synaptical pruning. So from your brain stem, there are all these little tweaky synapses everywhere. There's a million of them. They're like roots of a tree system, right? And the mTOR protein comes in and it's like, you don't need these, you don't need these, you don't need these. So if you've ever heard that story, you only use 7% of your brain. They are referencing mTOR proteins and synaptical pruning. They're like, anything that doesn't need to be in your awareness is getting removed from your awareness so you can focus on what matters. However, autistic people have a reduction of synaptical pruning. So we have, on average, 42% more synapses. We pick up 42% more information. Right. So when you're using 7% of your brain, we should be so lucky. We're not, but our brains don't know what's important or what's not. So we're in this constant state, and we tend to have very high cortisol levels of like, oh my God, that's important, that's important, that's important. And then we get overwhelmed, and that can lead to meltdowns or shutdowns. On the shutdown side, I actually have a condition called situational mutism, where I'll go long periods without being able to talk at all. Sometimes I talk a lot and I talk about the wrong stuff or at the wrong time, like in the middle of class when my teacher's trying to teach. And that's because there's so much incoming and we don't know how to manage it or process it. But we have a tool for processing it, which is called monotropism, single focus.
Okay.
And that is when we find our thing. For my dad, who is also autistic, that thing is hot rods. That's why it was so obvious to me when I found my thing, I would be super successful and make lots of money. So I'll give you some people. Steve Jobs' thing was computers. Eminem's thing is writing rap music. Questlove's thing is spinning discs and being a DJ. Emily Dickin's thing was poetry. So all of these people are autistic. My dad's thing was hot rods. My thing was writing.
Wow.
And when I am in a state of hyperfocus, everything else goes away.
Wow.
I am just writing and nothing else. I mess up a whole bunch of executive functions like eating or drinking or going to the bathroom. I can't do any of that, but I can easily stay up for 3 days and write a whole book. No problem. I got you. I don't need to
there's a lot of artists that would love that gift.
Yeah, right. But Andy Warhol, same thing. Andy Warhol was autistic. And when he would get into a creative zone, I mean, I think he has a film that's a 24-hour film that he filmed for 24 hours without eating or drinking or sleeping. So, so that hyper focus can be very destructive for people. And before my diagnosis, I would get into hyper focus and I would write, but I didn't know how to have boundaries and I didn't know how to eat or drink. And then I mentioned I would get into like situational mutism. I also dealt with a lot of eating disorders. I had a lot of complicating autoimmune issues. And so I was often very sick, as was Emily Dickinson, by the way, if you hear her story. She wasn't diagnosed because they weren't diagnosing back then.
Right.
So I would get very, very sick. Or I would get very hostile and angry because you know what happens if you don't eat or drink or sleep for a few days.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't bring out the best in you.
Right. Your mood.
So now I am much more able, I'm certainly not perfect, but I am much more able to what's called emotionally regulate. So I know what helps me regulate. I will schedule time to be in hyper focus, but I also have some supports built into my life to make sure I'm eating and drinking and sleeping and staying emotionally regulated. I'm not biting people's heads off so that I maybe have a better chance of picking up on social cues, but also everyone around me knows I'm autistic. And I will often introduce myself and say, I often miss social cues, but if you tell me, I will be very receptive. Whereas before I might have been more defensive.
Right.
Now I've created openings for the people in my life to be like, hey, you might have missed this thing that's happening.
Yeah. And people will want to help with that and go, oh, well, make sure, you don't want to, as the person talking to you, you don't want them to feel like, okay, now I don't think you understand this. So then they feel stupid, but you want to at least say, I want to make sure you understood that, that sort of thing is a really good thing. Yes.
And I can teach and guide people like, oh, did I do that? Like my sister and I just did a thing. I forget what it was, but she said something, whatever it was. And I truly did not understand what she was saying. Oh, I know what it was. She had told me something. I think every sister, do you have sisters or something?
I have two sisters. Yes.
Okay.
2 sisters.
I am sure you will have this experience. I'm sure every sister do this. She told me something my mom told her.
Oh, of course. Yes.
Okay. So I wrote a letter to my mom or a text message or whatever. Saying, Gina told me whatever the thing was, she told me.
Yeah.
And then I sent it to my sister and I was like, I'm going to send this to mom. What do you think? And she's like, I love it. It's a perfect message. Can you just take out the part that says Gina told me? And I was like, why? You did tell me. And she's like, but it makes it sound like I'm telling on mom, or whenever mom tells me something, I just immediately go tell you. And I'm like, but you do. And she's like, yeah, but I don't want mom to know that. And I'm like, are we lying to mom about that? Because we all know everything. You tell mom, I tell mom tells me, you tell me, I tell. Remember how we all know everything? And she's like, yeah, but you can't just say Gina told me. I'm like, well, how else would I have known? It's obvious. And she's like, yeah, but you're throwing me under the bus. And so we had this whole thing, and I kept asking it, and she got really mad. And she's like, just do it. I don't care. Just do it. And I was like, no, wait. I think you think I'm calling you a liar right now. I think you think I'm accusing you of something. This is my autism. I am literally asking you, could you please explain to me the social convention of pretending we didn't have conversations that we all know we're in our 50s. Our mother knows talk. Like, could you please explain it? And we ended up having the most beautiful soul connecting sister conversation, because she's like, oh, right, you're autistic. This is that literal communication thing you do. Right. Instead of, I bet people have lost years with their sisters.
Yes. Yeah.
Because they're like, she's such an asshole. She threw me under the bus with mom.
Yeah. Wow.
But to me, I was like, how else do I write the email? A little birdie told me?
Yeah.
Obviously, Gina fucking told.
Yeah.
So that's how autism can destroy relationships without a diagnosis. Because you think everyone around you is crazy. And all I did was ask a simple question. Why can't I say that?
Right.
And that seemed like an accusation. Like a neurotypical person is like, well, it's obvious, lady. What, you want me to spell this out?
Yes. Yeah.
I do want you to spell it out. And then my sister beautifully was willing to do that, which is such a gift to me.
Yeah.
We spent an hour and she's like, okay, let me explain how this works. Like,
yes.
She hadn't thought it through. She had to do that thinking.
Yeah. Well, you were training her again, a little bit more in the condition and what you deal with, and to make sure that you both understood that's communication skills. And that shows a real growth, because you had said how hard it is with those social skills, anything like that and then it explained everything with that diagnosis. Now you mentioned the neurodiversity, but what about neurotypical? You talk about the difference between autistic and the neurotypical cultures. Educate me a little bit on that and what that's all about.
Yep. So if you think about a bell curve, and you remember our grades in school, you want most people in the middle, like the C is in the middle of the bell curve. About 80% of people are going to be in the middle of the bell curve. And then, 80% of the tulips are in the middle. They're all about whatever it would be, 2 feet high or whatever they would be. And then there's going to be some super short tulips and some super tall tulips. And they're on the edges or in those margins.
Okay.
And that's what neurodivergent people, the divergent people, are in that tiny part of the bell curve. You could argue, but I always like to just argue 80-20 rule, but not hard science here.
Right.
I'll tell you why I think that. But basically, here are brains, and then the neurotypical brains are in the 80%. And then over on the margins, we've got the atypical brains, or the neurodivergent brains. All the brains are neurodiversity, but the typical ones are the 80%, and the atypical ones, or the divergent ones, are includes autism, includes ADHD, dyslexia, Tourette. It includes it also includes traumatic brain injury. It would also include, it's a different part of the spectrum, but the atypical brain spectrum, but it would include something like memory loss.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, because that's not a typical brain, doesn't have all that plaque that someone with Alzheimer's has.
Yes.
So that's why I say 20%. It's not that 20% of people are autistic. That number's probably more like 3 to 10%. More in some countries than others, interestingly.
Interesting.
Just like you find more blue eyes in certain countries.
Yes.
And more autistic people, because it's genetic.
Interesting. Yes. And I didn't really understand totally, because you all of a sudden you see an autistic child, but there's nobody else in the family that it looks like is autistic. But it could have come down with
It could have also,
yes.
There's something called masking.
Okay.
So what you'll see, you wouldn't have known my dad was autistic, and you definitely would not have known my grandmother was autistic.
Mm-hmm.
But I now know what a hyper-connected brain looks like.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so I can spot it. So if you see an autistic child, one of their parents is autistic. I mean, maybe two of their grandparents.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They might be masking, and particularly let's say that child is Black or has a Black parent.
Mm-hmm.
If that Black parent didn't mask, they might have been in more dangerous interactions with authority or police.
Right.
So, and for women also dealing with patriarchal expectations of being a good girl and being quiet. So you might think their mom is shy. She might actually not be shy at all. She might be autistic, but very well trained in masking.
Oh, interesting. Well, then, when we talk about, stereotypes, misconceptions, you've already mentioned a couple things about how just the sort of social implications there that can happen, and that happened with you, and what you felt like, with the desk in the hall and the whole thing. But what are some of the most harmful, you feel, the stereotypes or misconceptions about autism that you'd really like to? That's part of educating people. It's part of understanding the symptoms, and how can you help other people with some of that?
I think the biggest, first of all, vaccines don't cause autism.
Okay. All right.
We'll just get that one out of the way. But I think the biggest problem, I grew up watching ABC after school specials. Maybe you did too.
Okay.
The biggest problem is the way autism in the past, it's so much better now, but in the past, the way it was portrayed, and those of us that are in our 40s, 50s, 60s, the way we saw it is autism was presented as a line, kind of like you might think of cancer.
Okay.
Like you have stage 1 cancer, then you have stage 4 cancer. That's really bad. So we saw a lot of stage 4 autism, which was the boy playing with trains, locked in his own world, hitting his head against the wall. I know I saw an ABC after school special about that.
Right.
The idea was autism was this spectrum, meaning a line from the people like me who could, or my dad, who could mask and make a lot of money and be good at their special interests. That was let's say stage 1 cancer. Stage 4, the kid with the train who couldn't leave his room. That is actually not what this spectrum looks like. So it is much more like a pie chart with different spiky bits everywhere. So some things for some autistic people are harder. For other people, they're easier. Some things are easier on some days or some times of the day and not others. So the idea that there are levels of autism, or there's profound autism, or that there's Asperger's or level 1 ASD, that is the biggest misconception. That the reason why I was diagnosed with Asperger's, but we don't use that word anymore, is actually sort of it's a little bit of a sad story, but that was the idea. And there was a doctor named Hans Asperger's, and he had all these kids with autism, mostly boys. Boys were valuable because, women in the 40s. So there were two groups of them. He split them into the ones that he called his kids, Asperger's kids. They were the good ones. And then all the other kids that were the bad ones, the stage 4, they got sent to the gas chambers.
Oh, wow.
So the Asperger's kids, he was a Nazi doctor. And the Asperger's kids were the ones with autism that were worth saving.
Wow.
And there is so much brilliance that has been lost in the world from people who maybe didn't have the skills to mask, to save their lives like the other kids.
Yes.
But had much depth and beauty and genius. And then those of us that are good at masking, there's a downside to us because we're always trying to behave. Our suicide rates are extremely high. In women with autism, our suicide rates are 9 times higher.
Wow.
Than without autism. And that's whether it's diagnosed or not. So what happens is, if you have this idea that you're supposed to be one of the good ones, you have to constantly behave instead of being yourself.
Right.
And then if you're one of the bad ones, well, we're going to lock you up. We're going to put you in an institution. You're not valuable. So understanding the beauty of all brains, autistic or not,
yes,
really my mission. And we can't fulfill that mission without understanding it's not a line of good to bad. I saw somebody at a post once, right? Like my friend, cousin, whatever, has slight autism. And I'm like, that's like being a little bit pregnant.
Yeah.
You just have a hyper-connected brain or you don't. You might have other symptoms. But if we understood the beauty of hyper-connected brains, then everyone would be valued. And wherever you are, you could contribute in a meaningful way to the people and the community that you find yourself in.
Oh, that's great. Wow. And especially, I think especially relevant, of course, for women, because there was through, society and through so many years, they weren't diagnosed with, for women. So, but men, as they listen to this, there may be some men listening to this and thinking, oh, well, I can understand some of those feelings as well, but they might have been diagnosed a little earlier. You mentioned some of the famous figures. You mentioned Steve Jobs, Emily Dickinson, Andy Warhol. What are some others of just kind of interesting things or interesting people? Brilliance. I've read some book, Temple Grandin in Chow. She's amazing.
I want to talk about Temple because that's an interesting story that kind of messes up my theory of everything I told you. And I want to tell you why. Okay. So Temple is one of, not the first, but one of the first people diagnosed with autism. Yes. And he is obviously not a man or a boy, and was not a boy at the time she was diagnosed. That story is very interesting. Her family grew up near Leo Kanner, was at, I think it was MIT, but one of the Massachusetts, maybe it was Harvard, MIT. And they were in that community. Okay. So her mom was this very well-educated and astute woman. And her daughter was non-speaking, displayed a lot of behaviors, but nobody really knew autism. Nobody knew that word.
Right. They didn't.
And she
understand.
Kept going to doctor after doctor and then just happened to be in this mecca for neuroscience at the time and would not give up and was relentless, got this diagnosis because she did what a lot of women my age are doing now. She did the research. So I'm about to tell you a secret that nobody knows about Temple's mom. Almost certainly autistic.
Really?
Well, to do that amount of research, one of the big aspects of our culture is data hunger. And we will often go to a doctor with more information about our diagnosis than any doctor's ever had. When you go to med school, you got to learn a lot about a lot of things.
Right.
But when we have hyper focus on hot rods or book writing or whatever our thing is, we learn more than any doctor could possibly absorb. And my guess is her mother was autistic, and that's how she did all the work that got Temple diagnosed. Now, what didn't follow was women being studied and diagnosed.
Right.
It wasn't an anomaly. Right. It's an amazing she got her diagnosis, but it didn't follow. But one of the other super fun things to know about autistic people is social justice is a huge part of our culture. So very high levels of vegetarianism and veganism, very high levels of I was going to say climatologists. What are we? Okay. It's not climatologists, but people that care about the environmentalists.
Right. Environment. Yes.
So Greta Thunberg is one of us.
Okay.
And Greta Thunberg, probably at 13 years old, knew more than most scientists about the climate because that was her special interest. And her parents really encouraged it. And we're able to really make space for that special interest. So that's another fun one. I am working on a new episode right now, and this is a really interesting one. Freddie Mercury was autistic.
Wow.
And this is why I want to share this one with you. If you know anything about Freddie Mercury, you know he has this like kind of a weird jaw. He actually has 4 extra incisors. It looks like he has buck teeth. He has like a weird, it's like a big feature in that movie, Bohemian Rhapsody. He would get made fun of for it. That is a symptom of autism.
Wow.
So people, it's called hyperdontia. I'm learning things.
Wow.
And, so many people with autism also have something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or hypermobility syndrome. That's because we have so many synapses that it happens not just in our brains, but in our bodies. And we tend to have extra stuff everywhere. Part of CDS, which he almost certainly had. There's a famous picture of Freddie Mercury where he's doing a back bend and holding a microphone. That back bend, you can actually see that he's hypermobile in his back. And I found lots of documentations that his arms are hypermobile, his knees are hypermobile. And part of that hypermobility syndrome is also having extra teeth. The extra teeth that give him such a huge octave range,
sound,
and give him his vibrato.
Wow.
So that sound of Freddie Mercury you love, that is autistic culture. And that's why I think neurodiversity is so important. Some of the tulips are tall.
Yes.
And how great when we have a tall tulip, like how great to add that to our world, that voice that would not have happened without autism.
And you understand this because it's so, you're born with that, with a parent or whatever. So yeah, that's very,
and it makes perfect sense when you think about it, right? Like why would every single brain be identical, but everything, our hands are all different. Our eyes
are all unique.
Like,
yes. And with as many people in the world, you can go into any shopping mall. There's nobody that's going to look like you exactly like it's airports or whatever. Right. A stadium. There's, if somebody's looking for you, they're going to know it's you, not another person that's sitting by you. So how interesting this is. Well, how can we let's kind of land the plane here a little bit. As we talk about, this has been we could probably talk another hour on this, but how can we make even our professional settings more inclusive for these autistic individuals? And do you feel like you're so hyper focused? So do you need more privacy? Do you need just to be understood on the way you work? Maybe there are a couple really easy easy accommodations. So if you think about it, in the US anyway, we have something called an IEP in schools, an individualized education plan. So if you think about in the workplace or frankly, even in your relationship or your family, there are going to be neurodivergent people. And even if there aren't, this works for everyone. I think everybody needs certain accommodations, but because we're hyper processors, because we have so much coming, one of the things I recommend is just asking people what sorts of accommodations would help them that can be free or cheap. So one of the ones I wanted as an employee and I could never get was I wanted, and I used to do this, the fluorescent light bulbs above my desk. They had a buzz and it was so hard for me to work with that buzz. Interesting.
I could not separate the buzz from a conversation with my teacher. It was my boss.
Yes. Yes.
So I didn't ask. I think I stood on my desk one day and I popped the light out.
We did it. Yeah.
And then I got in trouble. It was a health and safety violation or something.
Yes.
So there's some way to do that. That's not going to cost you. It's $20 for a floor lamp.
Right.
So if somebody's asking that, just asking yourself, maybe that is an accommodation I could actually make that will benefit the organization.
Right.
Here's another one. I always went into meetings on my phone. Sometimes I would be taking notes on my phone. Sometimes I'd be playing a game on my phone. And I was told no phones in meetings. It's rude. But the problem is, makes it hard for me to listen is looking directly at you and listening without doing something else.
Interesting.
So hyper connected. I'm all over the place. I start panicking. I'm in emotional deregulation. Everybody starts to sound like Charlie Brown. By the way, Charlie Brown autistic, Charles Schultz autistic.
Wow. Okay.
The teacher's voice is what autistic people hear when we're dysregulated.
Okay.
And so if they just let me have my phone, I did a great job. Like my work was great. The quality of my work was great. Why is my phone bothering you?
Yes.
So we do this with our kids, you know, and pay attention, look to me, phones down, which sometimes works, but I know my kid will be much more disclosing to me and be looking at his phone at the same time. And I stay present with him, which is hard to do, but it's not expensive.
Right.
With earphones. One of the things I will take into meetings is a little bubble popper. So I'll just like hold a little bubble popper. That might be annoying. What I used to do is jiggle my leg. And then I would get yelled at for jiggling my leg because it was shaking the table.
Oh, yes. Well, I always do that just because I don't think I'm autistic, but I just have a lot of energy.
So being, I think, more open and accepting. Right. I think we don't like these things because we think we're going to get bad results.
Okay.
But separating the results from your discomfort of somebody looking at the phone and you having feelings, that means she's not listening to me. It means she's not listening to me, but take action. That, not the way people listen.
Right. Wow. That's excellent for managers to hear right now. If you have people in your in groups and to be able to understand, I think, some of that, and not just giving people the excuse, you know, using it as an excuse.
Right. For sure.
But there's legitimate physical things that are happening, especially with that or with it's a disabilities, like what you were saying, the ADA. It's a sort of, it needs to be classified in a certain area to understand what you're doing. And that's great.
And the other thing is just opening communication. Like my team knows this about me. I've written books on management as an autistic CEO. And this is just a little project. I gave a project to an employee, which was, I noticed somebody else who had a Substack. Our Substack is autisticculture.substack.com. But I noticed somebody else's Substack was just like autisticculture.com.
Right.
It say Substack in the URL.
Yes.
And I was like, what is this?
Yes. Did they steal it? Yes.
How do we press the buttons? There must be some setting or somebody.
Right.
So I messaged one of my employees who's autistic, and I was like, here's a screenshot. I saw this. I want this. How do we make this happen? And she wrote back to me and said, I just got a new diagnosis for something she's dealing with. She's like, I just got a diagnosis. And right now I'm rabbit holing. So I'm in hyper focus. So I'm rabbit holing on information about this new diagnosis. And I know if I try and do this right now, I'm going to mess it up because all of my learning new things energy is going to this new diagnosis that I have to deal with in my personal life, not having to work. So she's like, is this time sensitive?
Yes.
Or can it wait? I'll do all of my regular work, but since this special request, can it wait till next week after I've processed this diagnosis? And in this case, it was fine.
Yes.
And if I told her, no, it's an emergency, she for sure
would have done it. Yes, of course.
She felt comfortable enough with me to be like, I'm rabbit holing on this thing, and this is going to take me forever, and I'm going to do a terrible job. Can it wait? But yes, absolutely, it can wait.
Yeah. So there's that communication, there's that understanding. And how nice that you have on your team, those that are autistic as well. So there's that sort of understanding. So that's great. Well, how can people find out more? How can they contact you? What do you have? Do you have information available?
I do. And not surprisingly, It's on autisticculture.com because I haven't had that URL fixed yet. Well, it might now be autisticculturepodcast.com. It may have been fixed. I think.
Yes.
But yeah, so I run the Autistic Culture podcast. My co-host is a therapist who is only autistic diagnostician in Kentucky.
Wow.
Diagnoses autism, but is also autistic himself. And so we look at the ways autism shows up in culture. We also run a podcast and a blog over on Substack. Everything we do is free. And I spend my life writing books. So if you want to look at my ghostwriting, it's differencepress.com.
Okay.
My mission after turning 50 was to help more people who miss their diagnosis window. Most kids are diagnosed like in that maybe 2 to 7 year old range. And if you miss that, especially if you're a woman of a certain age and it just wasn't available to you, I just want you to know that it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's an aspect. It's nothing to be proud of either. I don't think it's a superpower. I really don't. But when you learn this about yourself, God, so much misery evaporates. Aww. And it's such a gift I just want to give back. So we make the podcast and we celebrate the people that, some of the people we've talked about here. We celebrate how Belle from Beauty and the Beast is autistic.
Wow.
How the story of the ugly duckling is a story of an autistic person, or by an autistic person about an autistic animal. So, Hans Christian Andersen was also autistic, and we just Taylor Swift. How about that? I missed the biggest one. She's one of us.
Taylor Swift. Wow.
So we celebrate those stories so that you can see yourself, hopefully, in some of these people and be like, oh, if I knew myself better, maybe I could contribute more, have deeper relationships, have less confusion about why I'm unhappy. It doesn't solve everything, but it gives you a whole new set of tools that no one told you were available. And I love that we're so much better now with the kids. The number one way people get diagnosed now is their kids get diagnosed.
Right.
Somebody tells them what I just said is which one are you? And they solve a lot of the mysteries. And then once that happens, it's like, how do I find a community that I can be like, wait, was I just being a jerk here? Or is this autism? We run a little community where people get to talk about that and share.
Oh, that's so great. Well, I'll make sure all the links of everything are in the show notes on this. Sometimes I write articles that'll go, a companion article that will go with this. And so look for that. Make sure you're on my newsletter, goalsforyourlife.com/newsletter. You can also get a hold of me on any of my websites. They're on everything. Deborah Johnson Speaker, DJ Works Music. But this has been absolutely delightful. Thank you so much for taking your time to do this and really to educate me and educate our audience. And I will make sure everybody knows right where to get a hold of you. And I usually check out
so much of this is new information and different than what people think. And I just appreciate your amazing questions and your willingness to listen to something that, you just didn't know a lot about and learned a little more today. So thank you so much.
Well, I learn a lot through podcast interviews, and I love the podcast platform. And I'm in my wonderful space here to be able to do this, producing these. So that's a lot of fun for me. Thank you so much for your time. And we will stay in touch, of course, Angela. And thank you all for staying with us all the way through.
Thank you for joining us. It is because of our wonderful listeners like you that we keep going strong week after week. We'd love it if you'd share and follow us to not miss a single show and even write a review. You can also find all of our articles, products, and links at womenathalftime.com.